There's a type of employee every company says they want. Easy to work with, flexible, low drama, always helpful, always calm, always willing to jump in. And if that sounds like you, there's a good chance your career is moving slower than it should, because being easy to work with sounds like a strength. But in a lot of workplaces, it becomes a quiet form of self-erasure. You think you're building trust. What you may actually be building is convenience, and convenience is dangerous, because the moment people realize you're the one who won't push back, won't make things awkward, won't force clarity, won't say no unless you absolutely have to, they stop seeing you as leadership material. They start seeing you as usable. That's the shift. Not respected. Usable. The person who can take on one more thing. The person who can smooth over tension. The person who can handle the messy client. The person who can absorb someone else's bad planning. The person who can stay late without turning it into a conversation. And this is where a lot of smart, capable professionals get trapped. Because externally, it still looks positive. People say things like, "We can always count on you. You're such a team player. You're so great under pressure. I knew you'd figure it out." And you hear that as recognition. But a lot of the time, it isn't recognition. It's dependency. And dependency does not automatically lead to advancement. In fact, sometimes it blocks it. Because when you're the person who makes chaos manageable, the system becomes quietly invested in keeping you exactly where you are. That's the part nobody says out loud. The more friction you remove for everyone else, the less incentive there is to move you. Why would they promote the person who keeps the current level functioning? Why would they take the one emotionally stable, operationally reliable person and create a gap? That gap would be painful. And organizations avoid pain long before they reward value. So you stay. Not because you're not talented enough to grow, because you became too useful to disturb. And from your side, this feels deeply confusing. You're cooperative, professional, reliable. You don't create problems. You solve them. You thought that would make people trust you with more. Instead, they trust you with more work. Different thing. That difference matters. More work is not the same as more power. More responsibility is not the same as more authority. More visibility as the fixer is not the same as being seen as someone who should lead. A lot of careers stall in that exact gap. You become the adult in the room, but not the one the room rearranges itself around. And once that pattern sets in, it gets reinforced in subtle ways. You're left out of early decision-making because you're needed on execution. You're brought in after the direction is already chosen because you're good at making things happen. You're trusted to clean up the politics, but not invited into the rooms where the politics are created. That's how it works. The pleasant, dependable person often gets used to stabilized dysfunction created by louder, more self-protective people. And because you do it well, everyone starts acting like it's your personality instead of your labor. That's another trap. Your adaptability gets mistaken for infinite capacity. Your patience gets mistaken for agreement. Your professionalism gets mistaken for lack of ambition. Your silence gets mistaken for comfort. This is why some of the nicest people in an office end up the most quietly resentful. Not because they're bitter by nature, because they spent years being emotionally intelligent in environments that rewarded emotional containment more than actual contribution. You become the person who doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. And that sounds good, until you realize that people who never make anyone uncomfortable also rarely force anyone to reevaluate how they're being treated. Think about how promotion decisions actually happen. Not the official language, the real process. It's not just about output. It's not even mostly about output once you're above a certain competence threshold. It's about perception, narrative, readiness, risk, influence. And if your entire professional identity has become helpful, stable, accommodating, that creates a very specific story about you. a safe pair of hands, a strong support person, reliable under pressure, excellent partner, great executor, useful story, but not always a promotable one, because leadership teams often confuse assertiveness with strategic capacity. They confuse self-advocacy with executive presence. They confuse boundary setting with seniority. And if you've trained the organization to experience you as endlessly accommodating, then the first time you ask for more, it feels to them like a personality change, not growth, disruption. That's why some people get punished the moment they finally set a boundary, not formally, socially. You say no once, and suddenly people act surprised. You ask for credit, and the room goes cold. You push back on workload, and now you're less collaborative than before. You clarify your role, and someone quietly decides you've become difficult. You didn't become difficult. You just stopped being frictionless. And frictionless people are loved for a reason. They cost other people less. That's the hidden rule. A lot of workplace praise is not moral praise. It's convenience praise. You are being rewarded for requiring very little maintenance from the people above you. You don't escalate. You don't demand clarity every time instructions are vague. You don't force your boss to defend resource allocation. You don't create administrative work. You don't make their life harder. That makes you emotionally cheap to manage. And emotionally cheap employees often get appreciated, overused, and overlooked in that order. First appreciated, then overused, then overlooked. Because once the system normalizes your flexibility, it stops registering as effort. It becomes the baseline. And once something becomes the baseline, it no longer earns extra value in people's minds. It becomes expected. This is also why people who are worse colleagues than you sometimes move faster. They are harder to ignore, harder to contain, harder to overuse quietly, harder to make invisible. They state preferences early. They protect their time. They attach their names to outcomes. They force conversations you keep hoping good work will make unnecessary. And yes, some of them are less competent than you. That's what makes this so painful. You watch someone with less range, less discipline, less maturity move ahead because they understood something earlier. In many organizations, being easy to work with helps people enjoy you. It does not automatically help them imagine you above them. Now let's talk about the psychological cost of this, because this part gets ignored. When you become the accommodating one for too long, your body starts keeping score. You feel it before meetings. That low-grade tension, that quiet dread when a new request comes in. That instant internal calculation of how to make this work without disappointing anyone. You become hyper-attuned to tone. You start managing other people's moods before they've even expressed them. You over-explain. You soften every message. You phrase clear boundaries like apologies. And after a while, you don't even know you're doing it. It just feels like professionalism. But it's not always professionalism. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's the residue of learning that directness gets punished, while over-accommodation gets rewarded, just enough to keep you participating. So what do? Not the fake advice. Not, just speak up more. Not, just be more confident. That's too vague. Here's what actually starts to change the pattern. First, stop confusing being liked with being positioned. These are not the same thing. You can be deeply liked and professionally stalled. You can be appreciated and still not be taken seriously as someone who should have more authority. So start asking a harder question. What role have I taught this organization to assign me? Not what you think you are. Not what your resume says. What pattern have people learned from your behavior? If the pattern is, they'll handle it. They won't push back. They're always available. They'll clean this up. Then that is the brand currently operating on your behalf. And brands are sticky. Second, start making your work legible in a way that does not rely on sacrifice. A lot of accommodating people let their value disappear into group outcomes. Stop doing that. After projects, summarize contributions clearly. In meetings, name ownership directly. When you solve something messy, document what happened and what it required. Do not assume people understand the cost of your calm. They don't. Calm people are often the most invisible laborers in the building because they make hard things look emotionally effortless. Third, replace silent flexibility with deliberate negotiation. This matters. Don't instantly absorb every ask. Pause. Say, I can do that. What should move if this becomes the priority? Or, I'm happy to support, but I want to be clear on ownership. Or, I can take this on once we align on scope and timeline. That's not aggression. That's structure. And structure changes how people read you. People often assume that the most senior person in the room is the one with the strongest ideas. Sometimes it's just the person who forces trade-offs into the open. Fourth, let small amounts of strategic discomfort enter the room. This is the part many people avoid, because they're scared it will make them unlikable. Maybe it will. A little. But total comfort has been costing you more than minor discomfort ever will. You do not need to become cold. You do not need to become political in some cartoonish way. You do not need to start performing dominance. You just need to stop cushioning every interaction so thoroughly that nobody ever has to reckon with your limits, your priorities, or your ambition. Fifth, make your goals explicit before your frustration makes them obvious. This is huge. A lot of accommodating employees wait far too long to communicate what they want because they think their consistency has already made it clear. It hasn't. Silence gets interpreted as consent. Adaptability gets interpreted as satisfaction. Endurance gets interpreted as preference. So say it plainly. You want larger scope. You want leadership opportunities. You want visibility with stakeholders. You want promotion criteria clarified. You want stretch work that builds the next role, not just supports the current one. Do not wait for people to infer ambition from resilience. They usually infer the opposite. And finally, understand this. The goal is not to become hard to work with. The goal is to stop being easy to use. That's different. You can stay kind, stay thoughtful, stay emotionally intelligent, stay collaborative. But collaboration without self-definition becomes absorption. And absorption is how talented people disappear inside organizations. If this pattern has been your whole career, none of this will feel natural at first. It will feel sharp, exposed, maybe even rude. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It means you've spent a long time over-functioning inside a system that rewarded your smoothness more than your growth. You were never weak. You were never lacking leadership ability. You were never just the support person. You were trained by the environment to believe that being easy to work with was enough. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it helps a lot. But if everyone loves how manageable you are, and nobody is seriously building your path forward, then what they love may not be your talent. It may be your convenience. And once you see that clearly, you stop treating endless flexibility like a virtue. You start treating it like something that needs boundaries. Because your career does not move when people enjoy having you around. It moves when people understand your value, feel your limits, and realize you are not there simply to make the system easier for everyone else. That's the difference.